All right, today we are diving into the dramatic and ultimately really tragic story of King Josiah. He's this pivotal figure in the history of ancient Judah, and his reign, man, it's like a brilliant final flash of hope right before everything goes dark.
Yeah, this quote, it just perfectly captures the stakes of his story. You could say his entire reign was this brief but incredibly passionate attempt to turn things around before the kingdom of Judah was just completely wiped off the map. It's a story of unbelievable highs and a deeply puzzling, tragic end.
So, to really get Josiah, you first have to understand the world he was born into. It was a kingdom that had been spiritually adrift for generations. Seriously, we're talking about kings, including his own father and grandfather, who had just filled the land with pagan idols and all sorts of forbidden practices. It was a mess.
And this is what makes him so remarkable. He becomes king at just 8 years old. Think about that. A little boy on a totally corrupt throne. But right away, he charts a completely different course. By the time he's 16, he's actively seeking the God of his great ancestor David. By 20, he's launching this massive nationwide campaign to destroy pagan idols. And then, at 26, he makes a fateful decision that will literally change everything. He orders the full restoration of the temple in Jerusalem, which had been neglected for years.
And that one command, to repair the temple, it leads directly to the single most important event of his entire reign. It's a discovery that absolutely no one saw coming, found deep within the temple's dusty, forgotten vaults.
Just try to imagine the scene, right? You've got workers clearing out these old rooms that have probably been sealed off or ignored for decades, maybe even centuries, just hauling away rubble and forgotten junk.
And somewhere in the middle of all that dust and decay, the high priest himself, a guy named Hilkiah, he stumbles upon a book. An ancient, important-looking scroll that had been hidden away for so long, no one even knew it existed anymore.
And you have to understand, this scroll wasn't just misplaced in a drawer somewhere, it was lost, totally forgotten. And that's a direct consequence of generations of neglect and kings who actively tried to suppress its teachings. An entire nation had basically lost its own foundational text, the very basis of its laws, its identity, its whole deal.
So what exactly was this book? Well, it was the Book of the Law, what you and I would recognize as the first 5 books of the Bible, Genesis, Exodus, and so on. It contained everything, the core instructions, the promises, and the really dire warnings of the covenant between God and Israel. And as it was read aloud to King Josiah for the very first time, his reaction was immediate and intense.
Hearing those words, all the blessings for obedience, and especially the curses for disobedience, Josiah completely breaks down. He tears his royal robes, which was this huge public act of grief and terror. He instantly got it. He understood the massive scale of his nation's sin and realized, to his horror, that his people were standing under a divine death sentence.
But here's the thing about Josiah. His grief didn't paralyze him. It spurred him into immediate action. He sent his highest officials to inquire of the Lord, to find out if there was any hope at all. They go and seek out a prophetess named Huldah, and she delivers a divine message that speaks directly to the king's fears. And her prophecy was the stark, 2-part message. For the nation, the verdict was sealed. Disaster was coming. It was inevitable. Generations of rebellion had made judgment unavoidable. But for Josiah personally, there was a word of grace. God said that because his heart was tender and he had humbled himself, he would be spared from having to see the destruction. He would die in peace. Now, armed with this really sobering prophecy, Josiah doesn't shrink back. Not at all. Instead, he launches one of the most radical and sweeping religious reforms in his nation's entire history. He was determined to align his kingdom with the words of that book, no matter what it cost. His first public move was just astonishing. He gets everyone in Jerusalem together. The text says from the greatest to the least. And he, the king, stands up in front of all of them and personally reads the entire book of the law out loud. Then he makes a public vow to follow it with all his heart, and he leads the people in renewing their long-broken covenant with God. And he followed this up with decisive and honestly pretty brutal action. He didn't just close down pagan shrines, he pulverized them. He put a stop to horrific practices like child sacrifice. He executed the priests of false gods. He even traveled all the way to Bethel, which was like the historic capital of Israel's idol worship, and desecrated its altar, which incredibly fulfilled a very specific prophecy made 300 years earlier. The climax of this whole national renewal was a massive celebration of the Passover, the festival that commemorates Israel's deliverance from Egypt. This was yet another core command from the book that had been almost completely forgotten.
And just to show how personally committed he was, Josiah himself donated over 33,000 animals from his own flocks and herds for the people's sacrifices. I mean, that is a staggering personal investment in the spiritual health of his nation.
So make no mistake, this wasn't just another festival. The Bible says it was the most significant national act of worship in 400 years. For one shining moment, it looked like the entire nation was genuinely, truly turning back to God.
This was the absolute high point of his reign, a moment of unity, of hope. But that prophecy of Judah's ultimate doom still loomed, and the king's own promise of a peaceful death, well, that was about to be tested in the most unexpected way possible.
So the whole geopolitical stage was shifting. The mighty Babylonian Empire was rising, and Pharaoh Necho of Egypt was marching his army north to help the crumbling Assyrian Empire fight them off. The problem? The kingdom of Judah lay directly in his path.
Now Necho sent a message basically saying, hey, my fight isn't with you, just let me pass. But Josiah, maybe seeing a chance to assert his kingdom's independence, refused to stand aside. He gathered his army to intercept the Egyptians on the historic battlefield of Megiddo.
And on that plain, the unthinkable happened. Egyptian archers hit the king, and he was mortally wounded. He didn't die peacefully in his bed. He died violently on the battlefield. So, how in the world do we square that with the prophecy that he would be gathered to his grave in peace? The whole nation was just plunged into shock and grief. Their greatest king in centuries was suddenly gone. The prophet Jeremiah himself composed laments for Josiah, funeral songs that apparently became a national tradition.
And his death revealed a truly heartbreaking truth. The national revival, as passionate and as sweeping as it had seemed, was tied entirely to the king himself. The moment he was gone, the people just quickly went back to their old ways. His reforms didn't outlive him. And this really leaves us with the difficult, heavy question. Josiah did everything right. He found the law. He repented. He led his nation with all his heart. But in the end, it wasn't enough to save them. It forces us to ask about the very nature of leadership and legacy. Can one person's righteous actions ever bring about lasting change if that change doesn't truly take root in the hearts of the people they lead?